Hello Mzansi, you are listening to Farmers Inside Track, proudly brought to you by Food from Mzansi. Officially, this is the world's best podcast for 2024 as awarded by One IFRA, the global organization for the world's press. My name is Duncan Masua and welcome to another episode in our Farmer Mentor series. Now in this episode, we're joined by Jurie Giliomee, a fourth-generation farmer from Bredasdorp in the Western Cape, who shares his story of their family farm and how it has evolved over the decades. We delve into key decisions that have shaped their success in cash cropping, more specifically canola, wheat, barley and oats, as well discuss their innovative crop rotation strategies that have leveraged farming data to enhance productivity. Now, Jurie also sheds light on the unique climate challenges and advantages of farming near the sea, as well as how they manage rising input costs without compromising quality through data-driven approaches. That and much more. Jurie, it's lovely having you on our Farmer Mentor podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lucky to be here.
Lovely, man. You know, for someone that might not have heard about you, they might not be aware of your farming business and your farming enterprise. Maybe briefly give us a background as to who you are, what you farm with, and maybe a bit of history when it comes to your farm.
So we're a family farmed and owned operation. I'm the fourth generation on the farm. I farm together with my dad and, like you said, with cash crops, and I've got a livestock unit as well. My great-granddad bought the property in 1947. It's actually a sad story. The farm was basically run by two brothers, and the one brother wasn't interested in farming. He went into accounting, and the other brother that took over the farming operation got shot in the Second World War. And then after the war, they put the farm up for auction because the other brother didn't want to continue farming. And that's when my great-granddad bought a piece of land. So that's how we started, and we expanded a bit, and that's why we're here today.
So there's a bit of history to the farm. I love that. And I always love connecting and chatting with farming enterprises that there's sort of a generation legacy or history, you know, yourself being a fourth-generation farmer. So it's always lovely and interesting for me to see, you know, sort of how decision-making processes have changed over the years, in terms of what we did back then and, you know, how focus have sort of shifted over the years. So we'll get into that in a minute. To our listeners, Jurie is an Afrikaans boy. If you hear him switching over to Afrikaans, bear with us. It is his home language and his mother tongue. And of course, we make space for that as well. Jurie, talking about decision making, what decisions that you or your father have made over the years would you consider has been key to your success?
So just a quick recap on how the operation is run at the moment. So I would say 90% of the daily operations is done by myself. And then it comes to planning and, let's say, the planning of the business, then I would say me and my dad is 50-50 partners. So if we're deciding to do something or try something new, then it will be a 50-50. But on the day-to-day running of the farm, it relies more on myself. The interesting thing, obviously, I get help from a lot of people. One of the people that helps me with planning, he also helps a lot of farmers in the area. And he once noticed something whilst doing planning for a lot of farmers. And he said there's a rule of 7 days. And that's the thing that I try and keep with my day-to-day operation is there's 3 days to do something too early, there's the right day, and then there's 3 days too late. And if you can manage all your big decisions within that 7 days, you'll most probably be successful. It goes straight through from the day you plant, the day you harvest, the day you spray, the day you market your grain, the day you wean your lambs, put the rams with the ewes, everything. He explains he's got clients that go all out and they don't spare any expense and they make money. And then there's farmers that do everything, try and cut everything as close to the bone as possible, and they also make money. So it's not a function of the guy that spends the most money will make the most money. It's the guy that can get the decision or the action done as close as possible to that optimal window. And obviously farming, there's weather and stuff that changes. You won't get it right every time, but to get it within that 7 days, you'll most probably make a success of it. And that's one of my goals, is obviously then to try and do everything in that optimum 7 days, and then farming as predictable as possible. If I know what my yield is going to be at the end of the year, then I know exactly what I can spend on the crop to not overspend or underspend. And that will carry through with this interview, is trying to farm more predictable. And that's where the stuff that excites me for the future. Data is the new gold. We're able to collect data and apply the data in such a manner that we can really start farming predictable, never mind the weather, all the other curveballs that we have to face with farming day to day. That would be the two main goals for me in my daily day-to-day planning is then to get everything done within that optimum 7 days and try and do it as predictable as possible.
You mentioned data, and that interests me quite a lot. Like you mentioned, it helps a farmer make better decisions. What are some of the data that you use to make better farming decisions? Is it data that revolves around the conditions of your soil, planting times? Maybe take us through that quickly.
At the moment, I've got a bit of FOMO when it comes to collecting data. I'm so afraid that I'm not collecting something, and then 5 years down the line, we realize that we can use this data to actually correlate it with this, and then I don't have the data. So at the moment, I'm keeping everything that I possibly can. The main drivers at the moment is obviously then soil data, that you can see what you're working with. Weather data is a funny one because you can't actually change it. It tells you something, but you can't really do something with it. It does give you a measure of, we are in a similar year as that, and that's how it played out. So let's go with that strategy or we saw that strategy work good in that year, so let's go with that strategy. And then obviously yield data. We've got platforms that we get in-season satellite imagery, so that helps us a lot with decision-making. The old school way of just driving with a bakkie or the quad through the camp, you might miss something, but if you get a satellite image of the field, you can actually see where the hot spots are, and then you can go and target that spots when you're scouting to see if there's any disease or pests or maybe malnutrition, and then go and apply or rectify the situation. I would say, the three main things then is on the cash crop side would be soil analysis, that is biological as well as chemical and physical, yield data, and then the satellite imagery. On the livestock side, it's a bit more extensive at the moment. It will probably be weaning weight, weaning percentages, stuff like that. At the moment, my operation is not able to identify individual animals. So
Yeah, I often talk with farmers in the northern parts of the country, and they're always quite interested and keen to know and understand, how farmers here in the Western Cape approach their farming. It's always lovely to be able to share that perspective with them. Let's talk about crop rotation. How do you approach that, and how do you determine which crops to plant each year?
So for the farmers up north, might be an unfamiliar concept in 2024, but we're not allowed to plant any GMO crops. So we still rely on old school herbicides and pesticides to control everything. A Roundup Ready option or a Enlist or a trait that can mitigate the effects of a pest. So just for the guys up north, we're non-GMO, and that obviously influences our decision-making down the line. We don't have all that tools that they have. At the moment, like you said, we've got wheat, canola, barley, and then oats. And our normal rotation would be first year wheat, second year canola. So then we can use different herbicides to control different weeds. And then third year barley. And then the fourth year would be a mix of either oats, canola, or pastures for the animals. And the fifth year back to wheat. That's the starting point. But as soon as we run into wheat pressure or something like that, then obviously the rotation gets changed. We also have some parts of our land has got higher and lower yield potential. The lower potential grounds would be in a shorter rotation, maybe just wheat, oats, and then back into a legume crop to try and improve the soil.
I want to talk about weather and climate because you're quite close to the area. But maybe before we get into that, for interest sake, your crops, what markets do you have in place for them?
Obviously, the wheat is traded on suffix, like the soyas and the maize. So that's a well-established market. The barley we produce under contract for AB InBev. The price is derived from the suffix wheat price. So the price fluctuates daily, exactly as the wheat would do. And then canola soil is the main offtake of our canola. They obviously also give a price out every day, which they derive from the European and the Canadian canola price. Oats is also mainly a derived price from the suffix wheat. So wheat price, a main driver in our economics.
I mentioned you quite close to the sea, and I suppose, farming in close proximity to the sea comes with its own unique set of challenges and advantages. Maybe take us through some of those challenges and advantages that you experience.
Where I'm sitting now, I'm about 5 km from the sea, so every day is like a sea holiday for me. But the main positive about it is we are a bit cooler than the guys farther from the sea. So if they get a hot day that they're predicting over the weekend, we'll probably be 2 or 3 degrees cooler than they. So especially in the grainful stage of the crop, it does help protect yield if you get fewer warm days. The challenges with that is then again trying to harvest the crop that needs to be dry. It shortens our window for being able to harvest the crop dry dramatically. A normal harvest day for us would be from, say, 11 in the morning till maybe 6 or 7 at night, where the guys 10 or 20 kilometers from me will probably start at 9 o'clock and continue until 11 o'clock in the evening. So that is a big challenge. We're at the southern tip. In a dry year, it helps a lot. So if the front just touches the land, we get a splash. But in a wet year, we get a big splash. So in most years, my challenge is not too little water. It's actually waterlogging, getting too much water.
Jurie, when it comes to input costs, farmers often approach it differently in terms of managing. How do you manage the rising costs of inputs such as seed, fertilizers, and fuel? Any specific strategies that you have implemented?
I've mentioned earlier that collecting data is a big priority for me. And with the data, we've been able to establish yield zones in every field. So I know over the last 5 or 10 years, this part of the field yields more than that part of the field. With the technology, the variable rate technology, we're able to apply different rates of fertilizer and seed at the different areas in the field. So the part of the field that's long-term yielding less than the other part of the field, we can apply less fertilizer, maybe less seed, and then try and minimize the cost over that. And yeah, obviously, like I say, try and farming predictable. There's obviously a risk in going in too low as well. I always tell people I don't want to be in the situation where if I'm sitting in the harvester, I'm thinking to myself that, this year I was the limiting factor. So with enough data, I can predictably say that we're aiming for a 4-ton yield or a 3-ton yield, and then try and apply the necessary fertilizer for that yield. But like I said, there's a risk in over-applying, and there's also a risk in under-applying, that all your neighbor is harvesting 4 tons and you under-applied your fertilizer and you're only harvesting 3 tons. So there's that risk as well. And I would say that the biggest tool is technology. From technology, a broad word, it starts with the technology in the cultivar that we plant or the variety that we plant, straight through from applying different rates of fertilizer to the chemical, straight through to the harvester.
So technology has definitely been a big part of the strategies that you implement on the farm.
I've been 13 years on the farm, and obviously I like gimmicks and gadgets. I've tried to get our farm as up to date as possible as the budget would allow with the technology. So for the last 2-3 growing season, we've been doing everything variable rate. So at the end of the day, it's not that I can see there's a huge difference in what I spend, but I believe there's a big increase in efficiency. So my yields have definitely increased in the better parts of the field, where it stayed mostly the same on the lower yielding parts, and using the same fertilizer as I used 3 or 4 years ago. Definitely increasing my efficiency through technology.
I love that you said that you love gimmicks and gadgets. So from gimmicks and gadgets to your sheep and cattle, because that's also another part of your farming portfolio. Maybe tell us a bit about that. When did that become a part of the enterprise, and why was it important to incorporate livestock?
So the livestock has always been a part of it. So for the listeners that don't know the area, we've got a lot of natural fynbos and veld and renosterveld, that basically virgin soil that never got plowed or anything. So the cattle, especially for the wetter parts, flaylands, the wetlands and stuff like that, it's a way to generate income of that pieces of land. If I don't have the animals, there'll be no income from that part of the farm. It's a cash flow generator. Being predominantly a cash crop enterprise, we've got basically one payday a year. With the sheep and the cattle, we can stagger our lambing seasons and calving seasons so that there's an income stream throughout the year, and as well as the wool that we get from the sheep. So the main reasons for adding the animals would be, let's call it the non-arable land, and then obviously having a cash flow generator.
Jurie, if I listen to you, it sounds like quite an expensive operation. You know, you've got your crops, the canola, the wheat, the barley, the oats, and you've also got your sheep and cattle. How do you choose which one is prioritized? And I suppose this comes to, you know, your financial management. What decisions influence you to say, okay, this year I am investing more on this crop, or this year I'm investing more on this specific livestock? How do you approach that decision making?
So I've mentioned I've got a consultant earlier that helps me with my planning, and he's got probably 50 years of data from guys right over the region. We sit and we say, let's do the calculation if we increase the sheep this year, and let's do the calculation if we increase the barley or the wheat. And then we try and find the optimum between the animals and cash crops. At the moment, the economics is driving towards the cash crops. The animals is playing second fiddle at the moment. But it can change dramatically. I was maybe in the beginning of the 2000s, it was exactly the opposite. If you weren't expecting basically a record yield, it would be better to cut the crops and make silage for the animals. It would be more profitable to put them through the animals. It's a cyclic thing. At the moment, the cash crops is on the top of the list, but it has changed in the past. It probably will again. Again, there's a risk in chop and changing too much. So you basically every year you do the calculation and you take a 5-year point of view and see, okay, it looks like the crops is becoming less profitable and the animals more profitable. Let's start shifting towards that. It gets re-evaluated every year, but we won't do a big move on a year-to-year basis. Like I said, there's obviously an expense or a risk in chopping and changing too often.
But definitely, you've been involved, you know, farming with your father for more than 10 years now. You know, you've sort of taken us through some of the changes that the farming business has gone through. When it comes to future planning, Jurie, what is your vision for the future of the farm, and where do you see the enterprise going in the next 10, 20 years?
At the moment, my goal is not that I want to say in 10 years' time, I want to add another 1,000 hectares to my enterprise, or obviously it would be lekker, but it's not a goal of mine. My biggest goal would be to every year, I want to say I was more efficient than last year. And efficiency can be measured either through the usage of rainwater, the usage of fertilizer, the usage of chemical seed across all the boards. And I think that would be my main goal, is trying using the tools that we have at the moment and the tools that will come down the line, and try and be more efficient to produce more food with less resources. Thus far, we've moved the needle, not always as far as I wanted to, but I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction.
You mentioned efficiency as sort of, you know, it being one of your success metrics. With that said, what advice do you have for farmers that are listening to this conversation right now, and they perhaps want to get to the level of operation that you are at? What is your advice to that farmer?
In Afrikaans, we have a saying, wie nie meet nie weet nie. So basically, if you don't measure, you won't know. So the first point would be start writing stuff down. If you don't have a fancy computer or gadget in your tractor or your harvester or in your bakkie, you have a smartphone. Just make a note and say, we had 20 lambs this year. Let's go for 40 or 30 next year. Time is a funny thing. A year can feel very long, but 10 years can feel very short as well, looking back on it. Start collecting data and try and measure your efficiency. It's not necessary for you to have a fancy gadget in your harvester or in your tractor. You know how many sheep you sell every year, or how many tons of wheat or barley or maize or soyas you produce every year. Start measuring it at a farm level, and then if you have the tools available, start doing it at a camp level, and obviously try and make it even more efficient and try and do it at a hectare level.
That was, of course, Jurie Giliomee, a fourth generation based in Bredasdorp in the Western Cape. You can, of course, read more on this topic by visiting www.foodformzansi.co.za. And that's a wrap. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss any of the episodes. From me, Duncan Masua, our technical producer, Megan van der Vent, and the rest of #Team Food from Mzansi, thanks for listening.